Oni are mythical monsters similar to the ogres of Western tradition. Like many of the legendary Japanese creatures, their characteristics are often adopted for manga characters, including series such as Lum, The Promised Neverland, and Demon Slayer. This time, Patrick joins me to give us the scoop on Oni. This is Tim.
And this is Patrick.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo. This week I'm joined by Patrick in Kumamoto. How you doing?
Pretty good. It's the new year. I'm sure by the time you share this episode, it won't be so new.
Late January, yeah. We're recording on January 5th. So Patrick, he's been on a number of times before for various reasons. A long time ago, we used to do Marvel Geek Out episodes. I'm not sure what happened to those, but
I don't even remember what we did on those, like what we talked about.
No, I don't either right now, but we might have been talking about like Bendis stuff, or it's been a long time ago. More recently, Patrick has been studying monster theory, and he's been on to talk about cats in manga and mermaids in manga. Today, the topic is Oni, or what, ogres? Would that be a good translation?
I don't think there is a good translation. I think that's why I try to just call them Oni, because as far as like ogres are kind of a catch-all, so that kind of works, and demons are kind of a catch-all, so that kind of works. So, Oni itself...
All right, how are Oni different from anything in like Western manga thought or monster thought?
So I think that just the particular combination of, like, it has all the typical monster things, which are, they tend to be bigger and they tend to eat people. But like those two right there, that just meant monster. Like if it's big and it eats people, those are two taboos.
It's not your friend.
Yeah. Don't be shaped weirdly. That's a taboo. And so if you're too big or too small, you're weird. Get out of here. And then if you're eating people, it's like, we don't encourage that. Please stop eating my leg. You're reducing the population, and we're just trying to build a civilization here. Come on, help us out.
Okay, so if you're looking at a manga or some other Japanese book, how would you recognize an Oni? What are the kind of characteristics that pop out?
Well, visually, you have this traditional image of the Oni, which is still used today in cartoons, in marketing, logos, characters for that advertise, that they put on food, etc. And then you have the yearly one spring festival where the little kids have to throw the dried beans at the Oni to keep the Oni out.
Yeah, what they call setsubun.
Yes, that's right.
In Japan. Yeah, and when my kids were in daycare, there was always be like a teacher who would dress up like an Oni, and my kids were always terrified. I was never sure that was such a good idea. But you're supposed to throw the beads at...
point. That was kind of the point. You're supposed to scare the crap out of them. And like in Akita, they have the namahage, which is kind of like where that whole tradition kind of spread from there. The namahage, or the big ass Oni, coming to your house, scaring the crap out of your kid and saying like, "Have you been a good boy?" It's like horrible Santa. It's like, have you been a good little kid? They're like, yes. Are you gonna listen to your parents? Yes. All right then. But like in some cultures, like when I say cultures, I'm talking about cultures within Japan, because I'm very much of the belief that there's not a Japanese culture as much as there is as much as, they try to, when I say they, I'm talking about Tokyo.
Right.
Tokyo.
Different regions have their own characteristics and their own like version of the Japanese language and
Yeah,
we have to remember they've been living in those places for much longer than white people in America have been living anywhere there. So there's been so much more time for different cultures to develop in different parts of Japan.
it's so interesting is like the movement that was started to kind of try to bring these isolated communities into the 20th century at the time, or at least the late 19th century, ended up kind of lionizing or like, it would end up recording all these great local stories, because they went around Japan collecting all these local legends and things, and then kind of trying to put some explanation to those, and then kind of like, but there's also this thing we call science. What do you think? But it was good because it kind of kept these different Oni and other monster legends, recorded them for posterity. And so that became part of the Japanese identity. But so I kind of, my preface kind of exploded right there.
But yeah, visually, I mean, when I think of Oni, I think of like they've got horns, like kind of little horns, not like antlers or something, but little pointy horns and maybe kind of fangs or kind of weird teeth, and often wearing some kind of animal skin.
Okay, so there's a bunch of different combination of things. You have fangs, you've got horns, you've got like glaring eyes, you've got like a bulbous nose, like all the features are like more, the hair is more frizzy and wild. The eyebrows are thick and unruly, and they wear tiger skin, and they have some attributes of the bull, and that is on purpose because there's like a compass made up of animal names of like which direction, and the direction which is right between the tiger and the bull, that's called the demon direction or the Oni direction. And it's like evil. It's like not a good direction for your feng shui. And they sometimes call it the Oni gate or Kimon or something like this. So so now I want to say that I'm not as like Oni is a very deep subject, and so like I'm still learning, and most of my explorations are how Oni showed up in comics, but when we were talking about the traditional look of the Oni, it's still recognizable as an offshoot of the Hindu Raksha, the Hindu Yasha demons, which have a very particular look. Like if you went to Indonesia or, China or, or if you went to India and you saw these things, you could definitely draw visual parallels to the Japanese Oni. They just have these big glaring eyes, and they have these fangs, and and they kind of have a similar look to them. And then when Buddhism and the Chinese brush painting kind of made their way into Japan, they went with that style. Like that was like how Japanese manga style is now spread throughout the world. It was like that. They were like, oh, okay, this is how you draw stuff now.
Yeah, all kinds of American 20-somethings drawing in Japanese style nowadays.
That's right.
Or something close to it.
Yeah, and so all the weird things, all the bad happenings that didn't have a shape or a form and had kind of a vague name or several different names, they kind of like found what they're supposed to look like when the Buddhism and the painting came across. They were like, oh, okay, this is what we've been talking about for hundreds and hundreds of years. And now it has a visual form, which is that traditional looking oni. So I think some of them, like a lot of different oni, they're very much demon-like in that they guard the gates of hell, and some of them have like horse heads and some of them have bull heads, and I think the ones that we are used to seeing in Japan are more like the kind of the bull head variety. Yeah, they often have like big clubs and such like that. So,
So what's bugging me here? So talking about the fangs and the horns and the tiger skin, Lum. In Urusei Yatsuda by Rumiko Takahashi. I mean, she's not an oni, but she sure dresses like one, to the extent she's dressed at all.
Oh, she's 100% an oni.
100%. But she's from outer space.
So that's what Takahashi did with that series. Is like when you go back, when I go back now with the knowledge that I have reading it, when I first, because that was the one that the first Japanese series that I read, and that's how I learned Japanese, was going through that. And when I first went through it, I didn't understand that foxes are supposed to have some shape changing ability, and there's a little fox in there.
There's another episode for us, foxes.
That's right. There's a little fox in there that falls in love with one of the characters. It's a side story. It's adorable. And I loved the story because the fox doesn't speak at all. So there was very little that I had to kind of process, like language-wise. It was all visual. And he changes himself so that he looks like he's wearing the student uniform, etc., so that he can get closer to her. And I was like, wow, that is a weird power to have for a fox, But now we know that if you look at the old, oh man, this stuff is so deep. You know how like, you know what a zukan is, right? It's kind of like a little visual encyclopedia of a specific topic or something. That also came from China. And then when it hit Japan, it was like a huge hit. And everybody's like, I want this. It was basically your encyclopedia because they tried to categorize everything. And they did. They categorized everything in this zukan, okay? And they put foxes and tanuki, which we call raccoon dogs, which, okay.
It's an odd translation, but that's what you usually hear.
So they put them with the animals where they belong, but they also listed their transformative power. Like they can also, you got to watch out for them because they change into people and they'll trick you. That was in there as, actual advice. And then you have the oni, they're just listed among like people, as if they just exist. There is like the oni and the tengu and the kappa. And then the tanuki and the kitsune, those were like the 5 classic, Japanese monsters.
Yeah. So, but why does Lum have like characteristics of an oni? I mean, she doesn't eat people.
So have you seen her dad? Her dad is like totally looks exactly like a traditional oni, except with like a more Yakuza type hairstyle. And so they don't
organized crime in Japan.
They don't eat people, but they have the tiger. She's got the tiger bikini. She's got the horns and the fangs, and she has the connection with lightning, which is also, some oni are, that you see them. They have the drums and they beat the drums, and it basically causes thunder and lightning.
Yeah, you see statues of them at the entrances of temples, Buddhist temples in Japan. Yeah.
Some of those are not actually oni. Some of those are gods that have those oni-type faces, characteristics. They're not really oni. But I think, so like Lum, that came out late 70s. By that time, a lot of kids were like, yeah, onis are made up. I don't believe in oni. And so it became more of like a joke, more of so like when we think of the traditional oni, we think of this is something for kids. And this is something that, we're not as grown-up kids. We're not interested in, doesn't scare us anymore. So they're a lot easier to make fun of. And so what Takahashi did with that series is that she brought in, all the aliens are based on traditional Japanese monsters. You have Yuki Onna, which is, that's the same exact name of the snow witch, or however she's called in English. I'm not sure, but and you have Benten, like they're based on she's based on one of the 7 lucky gods. I mean, she's bringing in all kinds of stories and tales into that comedy series. So it's, that was kind of one of the themes, is like she's gonna bring them all out, and she brought in all the traditional Japanese. She brought in, the kappa was there, like they were all there. And then she went again when she did Inuyasha.
Yeah, and a lot of the same source material, but
made them a lot scarier and a lot, like, she did more research. Like all the stuff in Urusei Yatsura is basically typical knowledge that you already have. And then when she did Inuyasha, she did more like research into
what modern Japanese people may not know about those creatures.
Yeah, she went a little deeper with those. So that's, and we talked about her with mermaids, because her mermaid series was one of the things that kind of got me to choose mermaids as one of my topics for research.
I see.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. So what are some other manga appearances by Oni?
Well, so like I was saying, at that time you've got the 70s and 80s, and even like, Go Nagai, right?
I know
Nagai Go. Yeah, so he did like Devil Man, and he did Mazinger Z, which we called Transor Z. And he basically invented the giant robot, like genre.
Gundam type of thing.
Well, it was pre-Gundam, because there's no way that you would build like Gundam is built so that you can quickly make a plastic model of it and it would work really well. And then Transor Z is kind of like very blocky. It's the concept is a lot more important. But if you look at all his giant robots, they're all based on Oni, and I don't know how much the themes he puts in there, but before he even did, he was doing like comedy stuff. He was doing gag comics, and then his very first serious comic was about Oni, and it was in the future. It's called, I have it right here, in his Oni collection, which collects a bunch of his stories. It's called Oni, The Revolt of 2889. And in this story, you have mostly kind of typical Oni-looking guys.
Okay, yeah.
Guys and women. And but what they are is that they are synthetic slaves. They were made, and they were kind of made to be slaves. But one of the Oni falls in love with a human, and the father is like a General Ross kind of character, like
in Hulk.
Like you've got Hulk and
Betty.
Betsy Ross, or is it Betty?
Betty Ross, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, she didn't make the flag. No.
That's right. I get those confused. And so they're falling in love, right? And the general's like not having it. He's like, I'm treating you like a son, and I'm giving you all these opportunities and stuff, but not so that you can, make love with my daughter, So it's kind of, there's this kind of class thing going on, the race thing going on. There was a lot of comics that dealt with that kind of thing in the 70s. But so anyway, they get married and they have a kid. And usually, as you and I may have experienced, is like once the Japanese grandparents have that kid, they just a lot of the tension of being from a different culture, that kind of creates a gateway for, less tension usually.
Mm-hmm.
But the general is like smacks the baby away and it dies, and and he like tries to kill the dad, and ends up the wife sacrifices herself to save the Oni guy, and the Oni guy is so mad he causes a revolt, and so there's this endless war happening between the Oni and the humans, and the Oni figure out a way to go back in time, and so they go back in time, and then they start torturing and doing terrible things to humans, and that's how the legend of Oni are born. That's the story. It's a time travel thing, and it's like, and we deserve it, And he did another like alien Oni idea, which was the Oni are attacking Earth and they're wiping out all the humans, and the very last humans are there. And the Oni's like, haha, you guys are the last ones. We're done. Finally, this war can be over after we eliminate you. And they're like, why did you even do this, man?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, we read your history. We know like your Momotaro guy went to the Oni island and got rid of all the Oni. And so we're here for revenge. And he's like, that's a story, man. Bang, too late. Like, humanity eliminated. That guy, Nagai Go, he loved going dark. He definitely was, had issues, but he loved Oni. He just he goes over the theme many times. Are like humans are basically worse than Oni sometimes. It can be his theme, like in Devilman the comic, not the animated version, which was a lot tamer. Comic was rough. It's just the humans are the worst in his world. But that wasn't the comic that really got me wondering about, like I might want to do research on something. It was the fact that I happened to start reading Demon Slayer, Kimetsu no Yaiba, and The Promised Neverland at the same time. Because those were both started in like 2016. I happened to start reading them at the same time. And I realized that in both series, they're using Oni, even though visually they don't necessarily look like what we consider the traditional Oni. And so I was like, this is curious and interesting. And so when I started doing the research, I realized that even though visually they had been changed to be, like scarier and much more like modern design, that they still managed to keep all the important Oni characteristics. Like sometimes they have one eye, sometimes they have a million eyes, and sometimes they have one horn, and sometimes they have three horns. It's like the number, they've got the horns and the fangs, but the number of horns and the number of eyes changes, the color of the skin changes. The Kimetsu Oni don't really change size. They tend to be human sized for the most part, and I think mostly because the Kimetsu Oni are once humans. That's kind of one of the big points, is that they were once humans. And I have visuals, but I I can only like really show you.
Mention what you're showing, and I'll try to. Maybe we can put something in the show notes.
The transformation into humans is also a thing that shows up in a lot of Oni stories. I think I neglected to mention that. The fact that Oni often masquerade themselves as humans, and then it's very similar to werewolf stories where they try to get the werewolf, they cut off its arm, they don't know who the werewolf is, And then later, the wife comes home and she's missing an arm. And you're like, oh. So there's that thing. There's the fact that humans, if they hold enough hate or some negative emotion in their heart, they will become an Oni. That's also an attribute of Oni. But like I was saying in the 70s, how that kind of, the view of Oni changed a little bit because it was more humorous. You know, they used him in like gags. The guy who does Case Closed, his series before that was about Oni. It's called Yaiba. And then also one interesting thing is that Oni as love interest. So that was, you know, you have it in Urusei Yatsura because the whole country fell in love with her, with Lam. And then you have like girls comics with an Oni character that, you know, the main character has romantic feelings for. So this kind of thing changed. But like I was saying, in the Promised Neverland, those Oni eat people. They have varying shapes, varying sizes. They've got the fangs, they've got the horns, they've got various numbers of eyes. And they're super tough, but they can regenerate, which is kind of a new thing. The Kimetsu Oni also, they eat the people. They have all kinds of different forms. Most of them are humanoid, but they still have all kinds of different forms and shapes. The size there's a couple small ones and a couple big ones, but mostly size is humanoid size. But they've got the fangs. A lot of them do have horns, and a lot of them have different numbers of eyes. So, and they can also regenerate, which is kind of a new thing. But basically, I was thinking, why would they use the word Oni anyway? Because the Kimetsu antagonists could easily be different kinds of vampires.
What does Kimetsu mean exactly?
So, Ki is the Oni, the character for Oni.
Same Chinese
and
character.
Metsu is like to wipe out or decimate, you know, just totally genocide, basically, of the Oni.
Whoa, okay.
So because the group, there's a group of young people who are out to destroy the Oni, and they're called the Kimetsu Tai, or the Oni decimating army, or the Oni decimating corps, or something like this. I don't know how it's translated because I didn't read them in English. But so, and Yaiba is the sword. So swords are big in this. The only way you can kill an Oni in that universe is to burn them like vampires or cut off their heads like vampires.
Okay.
Did you ever notice that the way the things you need to do to kill a vampire will basically kill anything anyway? So I was reading these at the same time, and I was thinking, why Oni? And I realized that the creators wanted to keep some of that rich background, this cultural flavor that is infused in Oni, because Oni originally came from a couple of different sources. Like I said, the Indian, the Hindu sources, and then the Chinese sources, and then you have the original Japanese sources of things in the air that you can't see but cause you to get sick and cause earthquakes, etc. And those all kind of came together. So it has, just like mermaids, it's from many different sources. It's survived as a cultural artifact for a long time, and so it's very useful for different stories. Like, you know, Nagai definitely explored the different ideas around evil, ideas around the Oni, like transformation and redemption. Also, though, the other side of that with Devilman, that was a totally an Oni that's like, hey, you know what? I think I like people, so I'm going to start helping them.
Okay.
So that was kind of a redemptive arc. So it's when I started getting into this manga research is also when I came across Monster Theory. And then, so I tried to apply Monster Theory to the Oni in these two series, which like came out around the same time and ended around the same time. In general, I think a lot of people see the animated version of, I'm just going to call it Demon Slayer. The English title is too long. And think it's a very simple jump, typical jump comic. But I see it a little bit differently. I think there's a lot of good things in that series which are worth examining. Like from the very beginning, when you have the main character, Tanjiro, his sister gets turned into an Oni, and she's attacking him, but he basically kind of subdues her, like puts a stick in her mouth, and he's able to still have empathy for her because it's his sister, and he doesn't kill her. And in fact, when one of these Kimetsutai guys shows up, he's out to kill her. And Tanjiro's like, no, please don't kill her. And the guy yells at Tanjiro, gives him crap. He says, basically, like, the way that you are acting is you're giving somebody else power over you to determine your future. And you need to, don't do that. That's bad. You need to think for yourself and you need to think your way out of it. And so Tanjiro does. He uses his axe. He causes a distraction, and he basically he does have some skills, and the axe, comes close to doing some damage. And the guy's impressed that he wants to try so hard to defend his sister that he's like, I'm gonna let you simmer. We're gonna check on you later and see how things are going. So this is a unique character on the good guy team, because most of the other good guys are like, Oni, kill it, and that's it. But he's got a little bit more nuanced look at the bad guys, because he could kind of see that there's potential there. And that becomes one of the themes, because later, as Tanjiro joins that group, he berates some of his senpai. Tanjiro does not use like polite Japanese with the other Kimetsu members. He just talks to them like they're people, which I think, like, he talks to them like they're all equal, which I think is a great thing that's happening in that comic. He's kind of bucking different things, and he says things like as they should be. He says, like, if you guys can't tell the difference between a good Oni and a bad Oni, then you should quit. You shouldn't be on this team. If you're just assuming they're all bad, then, and he has to prove himself. He has to prove that his sister has the potential to not eat people. And then, so that kind of endeared me to the series. There's various things that people say that I think deserve a little bit more attention. I think there's some good things happening in the series. I think like Neverland is a much better constructed series because you have two people working on it. You've got the story person and the art person. And in the Kimetsu series, a lot of the world building doesn't happen in the story. Like between chapters, there'd be these like, here's more about the world and stuff, My wife thought that was cheating.
So just like a status quo change that's just text, and then...
Well, it's more like, here's some rules that, about the world. And, it's just interesting.
Telling, not showing.
So you've got those Oni they eat people. But what's very Japanese about the Kimetsu Oni is like they have to meet deadlines. Like they have, it's called noruma, which I think is based on a German word, but it's like they have quota that they have to meet if they want to rank up. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, that's so Japanese, because like Japanese monsters do not get a break. It's like when originally monsters represent absolute chaos, no rules, no order, but Japanese monsters have to clock in, and they have to obey the hierarchy. And then on the other side, you have Tanjiro, who is not, he just follows his heart, what is right. And so for him, hierarchy isn't automatic. He will respect you because you kicked his butt or because you are a good person. He's not going to automatically give you respect because you're older or because you joined the team a month before he did, you know, which is kind of expected in Japanese companies. Is like you're automatically number 73. You have to show deference as number 72. So I think it's saying there's some kind of a little bit of antisocial tidbits sprinkled throughout, you know, a little almost anti-jump in a way, even though it looks on the surface like a typical like friendship and working together and hard work. There's also this, one of the characters says later on, like, why do you want to be strong? Like, what's your purpose in wanting to be strong? And it's basically, it's the characters that are weak that want to be strong, you know, because they had something terrible happen to them that they were powerless to affect. And so some of them became Oni and others became the ones who kill Oni, you know, it's very close. They're very similar. And so that I found that super interesting as well.
More on Oni in manga coming up. This podcast is part of the Deconstructing Comics Network, where we're grateful to our supporters on Patreon. Patrons get exclusive extra content. At $2 a month and up, hear Bat Bits, a Batman 66 exploration with my brother Paul. At $4 a month, you also get our new monthly show Silver Age Batman, where I discuss Batman comics from the 50s and 60s with either Paul, Patrick, Emmett, or Kumar, as well as our previous series on Jim Starlin's run on Captain Marvel and the first 50 issues of Amazing Spider-Man by Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, and John Romita. Check it out at patreon.com/deconcomics. And thanks for your support.
You like cheap comic books, right? Well, I'm Professor Allen, and I talk about cheap comic books on the Quarter Bin Podcast. In every episode, I'll dissect a single comic from my collection, as long as I paid no more than 25 cents for the issue. Forget about $4 new comics that you can read in 4 minutes, or crossover events that can cost $100 to collect. Join me in the Quarter Bin, where even bad comics are a bargain, and good ones are a steal. The Quarter Bin Podcast is part of the Relatively Geeky Podcast Network. Visit us at relativelygeekypodcast.blogspot.com or search Relatively Geeky or Quarter Bin Podcast in iTunes. I guarantee it'll be worth every penny.
The Promised Neverland side is like kids, especially smart kids, are food because the Oni in that world, they need to eat human brains in order to maintain their identity, because otherwise they will revert to animalistic characteristics. And so they need human brains. And the smarter the brain, the better, because it will add to their brain power as well. And so they also have these quota, basically. and there's a class system there's a class system there because the lords and ladies, they get the best pick of the brains. And then the ones on the bottom, they might not even get any brains, and they will be threatened with reversion to animalistic Oni.
Okay.
So there's a lot of pressure on the monsters.
Plus, they got competition with the zombies for the brains.
Yeah, it's a good thing they didn't have any. What's another interesting thing is like, onigokko, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something gokko is like pretending to be. It's like play. So it's like oni play, but what we would call it tag, the game of tag. And I was wondering if that was introduced from outside, like from tag. And no, it's a complete like Japanese invention. And basically it's a survival technique. Like if oni really exist, you want to be able to run away from them. And in Promised Neverland, all the kids get really good at it. And so it ends up directly connecting to their survival. I was like, I never thought of it like that, how that game could have that meaning. And I think it's touched on very lightly in Kimetsu as well. But that Oni play, how a lot of the things that they're learning is actually leads to their survival. But actually they're just being raised to be food, and they're just trying to, they're trying to get them smart, and they're also trying to get them physically fit, and also occupied. So yeah.
Okay, well that's interesting. I didn't know that tag and onigokko kind of arose separately in two different places and became kind of the same game, but
yeah,
it's interesting.
Yeah, and of course, modern kids, like, already when you and I were kids, like, there were already variations of tag, variations of rules, like, there's a base, or, so if you're on base, you're safe, or something like this.
Yeah.
So there's variations of tag, of the Onigokko, that my daughter played as well. She loved that game. I never understood why they would want to play it in our house. That never made sense to me. They live playing hide and seek, kakurembo, right? They love playing hide and seek and tag, or onigokko. And Japanese houses, they're not that big. You don't have a lot of places to hide.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else we need to touch on here?
So, just going through I've already talked about monster theory. There's 7 theses, and some of them are more easily applicable. And like the first thesis is basically the same monster will appear like at a different time and place and culture, and it'll have the attributes it needs to have to work as a successful monster at that time. So, when you have the old traditional Oni, which is basically trying to scare kids into acting good. Like, they even have an app on the phone where if your kid's bad, you can like, okay, I'm going to call the Oni. And then you call it, and the Oni, they use the app to try to scare the crap out of the kid. It's like the Far Side cartoon where the dad has like a string attached to something that knocks on the door. Is like, oh, I think I hear the boogeyman coming. And he starts knocking on the door, pulling the string, and the kid's like, so there's that very simple use. But in this, I think there's this, the main characters, what makes them different and what makes them heroes in both of these series is that they take a hopeless situation where the typical person would feel like, well, that's fate. There's nothing I can do. They're very, self-defeating, right? And I think that's a problem that you have with a lot of people, is that they feel like this is how I was born. I cannot change this situation. And then both these two decide they don't know the answer. They don't know how to change their situation, but they believe that there's an answer and that they should look for it. And so there's action taken. And I think that's like when, the Oni are perfectly situated to to help them on this journey to discover what it is they need to do. And in fact, like the Oni themselves tend to be easier to defeat at the beginning because it's a story, and then gradually get harder to defeat, and so you
Work
have
up to the boss.
Yeah, that's right. So you have to, like what if the story you run into the last boss, you're dead. That's it. You're not. It wasn't your story. The people whose story it is, they get the luck of facing the weaker ones first and then getting stronger.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another kind of, they perfectly timed monsters to fulfill a certain need at a certain time and place and culture. And they tend to be slippery, even if you kill, if something's popular, it's not you kill one bad guy and the story's over. No.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to come back next week because there's another monster to kill. And so, and even like the Oni itself, it still has life. It's still showing up in series, so that's thesis 2. The monster always escapes is basically about how even if you defeat it, you still, so like in Japan, you have festivals, right? And festivals are often used to reenact the defeating of a monster. And sometimes it's the opposite. It's like, don't kill us. Thank you. Please don't kill us. We're going to have a party for you. So don't kill us. But you have to repeat it every year. It's like, it's a never ending thing that you have to do to either appease or defeat the bad guys. And monsters tend to be an amalgam of things. So thesis 3 is the monster is the harbinger of category crisis. They tend to be, old monsters, a mix. Like the Oni has the bull horns and it has the tiger skin. Centaurs and, the dog-faced boy. Like they, they're a mix of stuff that we already know about, like Chimera, except the Chimera that we came across in our other podcast series,
Full Metal Alchemist.
They tended to be a mix, right, of things that already exist. And so that's where a lot of your older monsters are a simple mix. And so they're already busting, like, what is a human? What is an animal? What is the difference? How much animal parts does a human have so we stop considering him a human? If you think about, like, mermaids, we can often consider them pretty human, until we see the fishtail, So they're it's built into monsters that they're going to break down categories. In these series, like we have Oni that are good and that don't eat people. And so they threaten the status quo idea that all Oni are bad. And then you have the major bad guy in Kimetsu who doesn't really give a flip about gender or age. He just changes into whatever shape fits him at the time, whatever's going to help him get to his goal. And then you have like the main character's little sister is, she's a cute, adorable little girl when she's being passive, but when she's being active, she's a big, mean, sexy mama, with cleavage. Mm-hmm. And it's so what is she? She's trying to be all the things that guys want. What is happening here?
Well, when she's in the cute phase, why does she always have the piece of bamboo on her face? I've never read the comic, so I'm not. Okay,
so she doesn't get tempted to eat people.
I see.
That's the very first thing that he puts a stick in her mouth, and but it's it's kind of like a muzzling thing, and so it can be seen as problematic, but it has purpose in the story, and she does get to a point where she doesn't need any muzzling, and she's free to express herself. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of ideas about like, or what is the Oni like? Is it are they necessarily evil? And like, why do some of the characters only see in black and white, where other characters can see with nuance? And there's a gateway. There's always the gateway. So like Tanjiro, the main character in Kimetsu, he's got his little sister as one gateway, and also when he's fighting one of the demons. And it's the way it's drawn in the comic. It's like you have to connect both Tanjiro and the bad guy because they're framed the exact same way, doing the exact same pose. And I think that's echoing that Tanjiro's realizing this was once a person. The stuff that this person's dealing with is stuff that I've dealt with because he has a sister too. And so he often, instead of just killing them, he often psychoanalyzes them and kind of gets to their trauma. And I think that's what happened in the second volume when I realized I do want to read this to the end, is when his compassion for the Oni led to the Oni remembering what it was like to be human, and when they, didn't eat people, and weren't obsessed with eating more to get to that next level. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is such why am I crying? Why am I crying? It was so good. But yeah, it's what society does is it decides what are the monsters. It decides what we're going to hate so that, for different reasons, to keep power, to keep people afraid or whatever, or to keep undesirables out, so they say. But it's really because they don't want new ideas, or, there's all kinds of reasons that people create monsters. Like, I had no idea that this election cycle would be so much about monsterizing the trans community. That was... And the fact that it had such a huge impact on the results was...
Yeah. Well, and of course, immigrants also.
Oh, yeah. Always. So, like, monsterizing them is, the way it's done, it's textbook monsterization. They're automatically bad. They automatically do these taboo things, which you're not supposed to do. And so there's no nuance. You have characters that want to simplify everything so that they have their one mission, which is if they can kill all the Oni, then the world will be a better place and I will stop having this trauma related to my mom or whatever, So that's what simplification does. You see the world in black and white. You don't have to worry. You don't have to think. You just have your goal, and it's very simple. And it will end in lots of bloodshed, but, but at least you don't have to think. You can just act. And so that's how monsters are often used. But that's why it's great having these characters who learn to think in more complex terms. They see the so-called enemy in different shades and recognize that they're not necessarily worse than us, There's always these characters that act just as bad as the Oni in these series. If there is characters like that, I think that's an interesting series, because it's saying something about the nature of monsters and heroes and how they tend to be very similar. But just, as a manga, just visually, the way that these creators create the connection between the monsters and the humans is just great. It's just you feel the connection, and it's visually right there. It's spelled out for you in a way that kind of gets at your emotions. And yeah, it's this kind of connection that these characters have with one character allows them to see the world more complex terms, and then they can now actually befriend other so-called good monsters So I think those kind of themes quite important to the modern age, where we're still battling the simplification of information instead of looking at things through a complex lens.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, like how monsters represent chaos, and in thesis 5 is the monster polices the border of the possible. Monsters do the things that we cannot do. Like in the Promised Neverland, you have an Oni that can warp time and space, and that's kind of a scary proposition. It's like when you don't know where to put your feet down. That's a very scary world. And that's what it's like in the actual world. Is like there's no actual rule book that we can follow, but we do have lots of books of wisdom which will try to help us gain some kind of footing. And then in Kimetsu, you have an Oni that can also warp space, and so gravity also is like you're not sure where you are or what you're doing. And that's basically what a lot of people are facing in the modern age, with so much information and with so many new ideas, about whatever identity or whatever. There's so many new ideas that they're like no longer comfortable of. Like, what is it supposed to mean to be a man? I used to know, but now I don't know. So I'm going to just zip through the last two. The fear of the monster is really kind of desire. We see this everywhere in Japanese comics now. It's like the monster chicks are hot, and there's a whole series about hot monster chicks.
Well, and I feel like that to some extent that's true in Western stuff too. I mean, like, in superhero comics, you got sexy female supervillains too, wearing like really revealing costumes and stuff, but they're evil.
Yeah. It's, but it's true. Like when something is taboo, even if we don't necessarily want to do that taboo thing, we are curious about it, Like, why do people love true crime so dang much? Because that's like the killing of another human is one of our longest and greatest taboos. Is you're not supposed to do that. And so understanding why somebody would do that, what pushed them. So as far as like, we're curious, but we also want to make sure that doesn't happen to us or somebody around us as well. We're trying to understand. So there's always this curiosity about the things that we're not supposed to mess with. So that taboo subject, except for like the eating of people, it's not as big a theme. It's more a theme, I think, how it shows up in Kimetsu is like the thing that you hate, that's still part of you. Your hate for that thing, that's you too. So anything that you really hate, like you've made that part of yourself because you hate it. You push it away and you're trying to get it far from yourself. And so you're basically creating your identity through that. Not your whole identity, but part of your identity. That's what Kristeva called abjection, which is trying to push away something that you find disgusting, horrible, scary, whatever. But that still maintains this kind of umbilical cord link to you. You're giving birth to that monster on the other end. And that's kind of, there's a lot of, especially in Kimetsu, like dealing with your fears by monsterizing them and then like trying to kill them, and then the last thesis is the monster stands at the threshold of becoming. This one's very difficult, but it's more about the monsters that we create are going to come back and get us. And basically what they're going to do is they're going to ask us, why did you make me, Dr. Frankenstein? What was your purpose? You made me, you threw me out into the cold and took no responsibility for me. So I'm going to make you rethink, that's what Godzilla is, like, oh, you're going to play with nuclear weapons. Okay, well, here's what is it? You effed around and now you're going to find out with Godzilla. And God, the smog monster that Godzilla fight, Hedorah. That's pollution. If you do too many bad things, it's going to come home. Your sins coming back
which
to
was
get you, kind of thing.
A big issue in Japan in the 70s. Pollution.
Well, I only knew it was a big issue because it was on like the TV shows that I watched. That the Japanese, like Spectra Man, was very, very eco-focused and anti-pollution. Very eco. Yeah, that was a good show. Good show. But they especially Kimetsu definitely deals with the fact that that people can easily become the monsters that they fear. And it's like, you look into the abyss and it looks back into you, kind of thing. Also in Neverland, you have the person so obsessed with getting rid of the Oni that he becomes worse than an Oni. This kind of thing. And you have characters that use the power of their enemy so that they can better defeat the enemy and this kind of thing. But it's much more interesting as just like, these are the monsters that we create. Whenever you look at monsters, you're like, are they really doing worse stuff than the stuff we do to ourselves? Really? Are they the worst? Like, I think we're going to come across that in our other podcast when we're talking about Kiseiju, Parasite.
Parasite.
Yeah. Because that starts from the beginning that somebody had this thought, and then suddenly these monsters are appearing. It's very direct. This thesis 7 of something now, whether it was created from pure thought or we're never going to know, but it's like there's something, there was a need, and the monsters, which in Latin comes from the word like warning, and that's what it is. It's a portent. It's a warning, like you better clean your act up or, you're going to get more monsters. So, yeah, so this was the very first thing that the first research paper I did was on sound effects. And then I went into the cultural area and I found it extremely fascinating, the way that these cultural artifacts are used. Like werewolves for us in the West, there's never going to stop being werewolf movies. I've already seen 3 new werewolf movies that came out last year. And, there's just certain monsters that are so useful. You can put so much emotional baggage onto them and have them carry so much different weight.
Vampires had a big moment just a few years ago.
And they're not gone completely. No. Neither the zombies are. Well,
Marvel just had a big vampire-related event very recently.
Yeah, the whole, the zombie thing, even if, I was kind of done with zombies for a while after, I think it was whatever season of The Walking Dead where they killed one of my favorite characters. I was like, I'm not enjoying this. I enjoyed the horrible, horrible, horrible murder of my favorite characters in Game of Thrones much more than I enjoyed the horrible murder of my favorite characters in Walking Dead. So.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, interesting. Are you studying any other monsters we can do in a future episode?
Well, I've been looking into werewolves in Japanese manga, and it's definitely different because werewolves themselves, as wolves, are a Western thing, basically. They have different transforming, you've got your Inugami, your dog gods, and which are basically wolves, really. But and you have your foxes that change into people. But just purely looking at the idea of werewolves, I haven't found my hook yet. But I've come across a ton of interesting comics there. I could probably do a top 10 werewolf comics. There's one creator I didn't mention, which was Hino Hino Hideshi. He's mostly did horror comics, like almost exclusively horror comics, but he also did a lot of folk tales. And so his Oni stuff has all the trappings. He also did some great mermaid stuff, which I used in my research. He just very, these ancient tales, these ancient creatures still have some effect on us. They still are usable. They still can be. They're commodified now. Pocket monsters. Come on.
Yeah, Pokemon pocket monsters. Yes,
they're monsters you can enslave and force to fight each other in terrible gladiator games. Those poor pocket monsters. They're being treated horribly. I'm waiting for Hermione Granger to come up with a movement to free the Pokemon. As she tried to do for the elves in the Harry Potter world.
Okay. Check the link in the show notes to Patrick's YouTube channel with multiple videos on Oni, as well as other manga-related topics. Thanks to our patrons for supporting Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and our other podcasts. To join them, go to patreon.com/deconcomics. At deconstructingcomics.com, you can connect to us on X, Facebook, YouTube, and Blue Sky, and find links to subscribe to the podcast. You can comment on any episode on our site, drop us a line at mail@deconstructingcomics.com, or talk to us. Click the Leave a Voicemail link on the left sidebar of our site. Are you making a comic? Send it to us and we'll do a Critiquing Comics episode about it. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. The music backing the promotion of our Patreon is Change by Jazar. Next week, Emmett and I get back to our look at Jack Kirby's 1970s work. We'll be discussing Captain America's Bicentennial Battles, a Treasury-sized one-shot from 1976. It's Kirby, so you know it's going to be bombastic, fun, and maybe corny. So be sure to listen next week. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.